welcome to the Chaarat webcast for the H1 2020 financial results. We hope you're all well and safe. Before we start with the presentation, we want to just quickly go into the logistics for the webcast. So the presentation is split between 3 sections, and at the presentation will be recorded and also available online afterwards in the news webcast section of the homepage. You will have the opportunity to raise questions in the Q&A bottom at the lower end of your screen throughout the presentation. We will then collect the questions and tackle them in the questions section in the end of the presentation. You will also have the opportunity to use the raise hand button, which means that you can raise your hand to put a live questions, and we will also reflect them in the Q&A session in the end of the session. Now, looking at the agenda quickly for today's presentation, we have 3 sections. The first one is the executive summary, which will be presented by our CEO, Artem Volynets, before we go into the operations update with an ESG update as well, presented by Darren Cooper, our COO, and then heading towards the financial update presented by Chris Egger, our CFO, before we head to the Q&A. I would like now to hand over to our CEO, Artem, for the first part of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. On this page, you see who is present on the call today. You can see that myself and Darren enjoying the views over Kapan in Armenia on our background, and Patrick and Chris see the beautiful landscape of the Kyrgyz Republic, where our other assets are located, just to give you a flavor where we are. Again, we are on a call with you today to report on the results for the first half of 2020 and answer any questions you may have. Can I have a next page, please? Just to remind everyone what Chaarat is today. It's a company with a massive amount of resources, 10 million ounces and reserves, and resource to reserves conversion is happening quickly. We have 1 producing asset in Armenia with roughly 55,000 ounces of gold equivalent production, producing copper and zinc concentrate, but gold being the main financial driver. EBITDA of getting close to 19-20 million for this year. We have asset in construction, Tulkubash, which expected to come online in production 2 years from now. And that expected to increase our overall production to roughly 150,000 ounces. And the third asset, which is the biggest asset we have, Kuzultash, we plan to bring into production in roughly 6 years from now, therefore going to close to 500,000 ounces from the existing asset base. On top of that, we are constantly on lookout for possible M&A opportunities to add to that construction, to add to that production pipeline. Chaarat has been transformed from an exploration company into the producer, and today we will be reporting on some of the achievements of that path. Can I have the next page, please? I'm pleased to report that for the first time in Chaarat history, the group achieved a positive EBITDA for the first 6 months of this year, which is a reflection of the path that we've chosen to execute on, moving into the operational company and the producing company with the acquisition of Kapan. Kapan generated roughly $4 million in EBITDA in the first half of this year, but if you add to that EBITDA in July of $4 million, for the first 7 months we over $8 million. In the first half of this year, the prices of gold and silver and zinc and copper moved in opposite directions, Now from roughly mid of this year, they're moving into the same positive trajectory. So we expect a better second half, but again, seeing good results of the operational improvements in Kapan, increase in third-party ore processing, and decrease in all-in sustaining costs. So very much steady, stable, and showing a very good progress across all the operations. In Tulkubash, in spite of the challenges presented by the pandemic, we are continuing to build the project with the first goal scheduled to be in Q3 2022, with significant progress made this year. Despite the country being closed, we have continued to advance our earthworks with our contractor Chieftain, and Darren will report further on exact progress of the construction there. On Kızıltaş, we have completed a metallurgical study this year to understand better the processing options that we have, and very excited to move this project forward, as this is the biggest ore body that we have. In the middle of the pandemic, we successfully raised close to $14 million of equity, paid down debt, so very much continue to proactively manage our balance sheet and feel very confident in our ability to meet our obligations, raise money, and continue to fund the business in the best way possible for the shareholder value accretion. As I mentioned before, the positive outlook for the second half is driven by the significant operational progress that we have, by the continuous positive impact of the commodity prices now across all 4 commodities that we produce, and by the additional net bottom line additions of the third-party ores that we're processing in Kapan. I will let the team to go into the details of each of those items, and happy to answer questions at the end of this presentation. Now over to Darren. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Artem. As you can probably appreciate, our operations have been heavily focused on COVID-19 for much of H1. I'm glad to say that the early precautions that we took have served us well as far as our operations. We imposed social distancing, temperature checks, mask wearing, and controls to all of our sites very early on, and that has resulted in minimal impact and minimal safety issues for our employees. And at the same time, we've managed to maintain our overall safety performance as well, which is a very good outcome. True to our stated goals around ESG, we have really focused on making sure that the health situations in country and children's activities have been maintained as much as possible during this period. So we've put our focus in healthcare facilities in both of our operational jurisdictions with as much support as we possibly can during this period. We contributed beds and equipment to the medical center in Kapan, and we also provided the ability for children to be able to gain remote access learning, which has been a particular challenge for children during this time. And those have been the main activities. We also very early on decided that we would, not knowing what would happen with logistics in country, especially in Chaarat region, which is quite remote, we made sure that there was additional sources of food were provided and also disinfectant. And we've made sure that we've provided both the PCR unit to Kyrgyzstan and also sort of early testing kits into both jurisdictions. And we've continued that into the second half of the year as well. We've also provided quite a lot of oxygen concentrators into Kyrgyzstan just to try and help out, especially during that second wave of the pandemic. Next slide, please. So with regards to operations during the first half, our priorities remain the same as we've been stating since the acquisition of Kapan. making sure that we get the mining tons and the grade as high as possible, getting the throughput to the mill optimized, recoveries and costs. And despite the issues of COVID, we've managed to maintain that focus on all of those areas. Our mining tons continue to improve. We have seen some issues with grade, and that remains our key target area. We have significant amount of work ongoing at the moment, looking right the way through the value chain of the mine, from the resource identification at the beginning all the way through to our different mining methods, and to make sure that we can get those grades back up to where they need to be in H2, and we are seeing positive signs of significant improvement in that area. With regards to recovery, we've introduced new cyclones into the operation, and certainly already seen improvements to copper and zinc recoveries. And we have several more initiatives which we are working and have underway for H2 and into 2021 as well. All-in sustaining cost, we have done significant improvements again throughout the course of H2. Our unit cost performance has come down nicely and continues to improve. At the moment, though, obviously because of some of the impact that we've seen around the slightly lower grades, we haven't seen that flow through into the all-sustaining cost. I haven't achieved our target for H1, but certainly for H2, we're expecting to see significant improvements in that number. Next slide, please. So with regards to the Kapan mining outlook, our focus remains on achieving our target of 55,000 ounces. And we will be working on making sure that occurs. The improvements that have already been made, and some of those I'll go into in a little bit more detail. New mining equipment, we've got our first new vehicles into the fleet in July. They were supposed to be arriving much earlier in H1, but got significantly slowed down because of the challenges of getting materials across borders. But I'm glad to say they are now on site and in operation. Cyclones I've mentioned, so we're seeing good improvements there. Some fine tuning to still be done, but definitely improving the operation already. One of our major areas for targeting going forward in Kapan is what we call the East Flank development. This is an area, as the name implies, over to the east side of the existing mine. It's a historical exploration area, which we believe now has very good potential to be developed. It's the right time to be developing it also, because it will help us debottleneck the mine and make sure that we can continue to get the full amount of material into our mill, just to maintain and improve our operations there. It helps us debottleneck because it actually increases the number of access ways into the mine, which is one of the key bottlenecks for Kapan at the moment. So that will see us make some significant improvements as we move forward. It's about a 2-year timetable. We need to do some more drilling just to really firm up the resource, and then move into the reserve, and then start the work to develop the mine. Significant amount of work has already occurred looking at the deposit, firming it up, and making sure that we understand what the full capital implications are. So we should be able to get ore into the mill probably from around about H2 2022. So that will be a nice improvement for the operation, reduce our costs, improve our efficiencies, and increase the amount of ounces that we're actually making per year. Next slide, please. With regards to Torkabash, we have had to slow down somewhat on our amount of work that we were doing on site because of COVID. It dramatically impacted the ability to get materials and people onto site. And the first wave was very much a case of lockdown, very well controlled in country. But as the restrictions started to become a little bit less, we did see significant amount of individuals starting to suffer from COVID in country. And that's when we had to put in place our own controls and slow down access to site and really manage the pandemic much more closely. But we still managed to get some significant amount of work done during the course of H1, focusing with our equity partner Chiftai on continuing the earthworks, continuing work around the heap leach facility, and working with our engineering partners in other parts of the world, working on the heap leach facility engineering and also the absorption-desorption recovery plant. Those are now significantly advanced in engineering and will be wrapped up this year. And we are continuing to work on the other engineering aspects also to make sure that those get finalized as quickly as possible. We've had good work in country, so we've managed to start work on the tree cutting and clearing the area, so that once we do manage to ramp up the operation, again very shortly, we will be able to move forward at full speed. And to ensure that we have the operation ready for all the extra people that come in, we have started the installation of Advanced Camp, which is the first phase of our 360-man camp, and are in the process of moving the rest of the camp facility to site. So we'll be able to get that installed in the very near future. So far, close to 10% of project construction has been completed to date. It doesn't sound like much, but the work behind the scenes will allow us to very quickly ramp up and get into full construction mode very quickly afterwards. That's been our key focus in that area, making sure that we are ready as soon as possible. Next slide, please. With regards to Kızıltaş, as Archer mentioned, this is the main deposit for our Kyrgyz area. Very significant amount of tons, very significant value for the organization as a whole. We've spent H1 looking at what would be required and really thinking through the next steps of this so that we can move into this operation in a quicker way. We've gone through looking at with the metallurgy, and also just getting a good understanding of the engineering requirements, working with several engineering companies over the last 3 months just to really firm up on a timing basis what would be required, and also on a cost basis what would be required. So we've worked with John Marsden, who is a well-known international expert dealing with sulfide ore bodies, looking at what the recoveries would be, what type of oxidation treatment would be required prior to cyanide leaching, firmed up all of our earlier thoughts on that as to which types of processes will work for us. And our next step of operation will be going into actually doing some metallurgical testing. That's our next step, getting the drilling done, the metallurgical testing to really firm up on what type of equipment and processing will be required, and then getting into the feasibility work next year. So all of that is designed over the next 6 years to bring our operation to full production. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll pass over to Chris Egger, who can go through the finances of the items that I've just talked about. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Darren. So look, maybe just starting on the number side of things, fairly strong first half of 2020. As you can see on the left side of the page, the business is evolving. We'll start maybe just looking at revenues. Look, revenues were fairly flat year over year. The revenues, though, are only coming from our Kapan operation, which I think, as Darren explained, had a very strong half with respects to fairly good volumes. Prices, interestingly, whilst the gold price was higher, the base metals prices, copper, zinc, and silver were all lower year over year, which effectively created a fairly flat impact on revenues. The other key item to add here is the fact that in 2020 we had 6 months of operations relative to 2019, which we had only 5 months of operations because we acquired the mine on February 1st. When you work through the income statement, the selling expenses and admin expenses incorporate Kapan, as well as what we call our corporate office expenses, and as well as the Bishkek operations. So it's best to look at the profitability in the chart or the table on the top right side, which gives a pretty good overview of how the business is performing year over year. So starting with Bishkek, you'll see that the expenses came down slightly. And I think, as Darren highlighted, this is as a result of COVID impacting the operations and effectively us being very cognizant with reducing costs in these quite volatile times. Armenia, Kapan, again, had better EBITDA year over year as a result to 6 months of operations versus 5 months. Our operating costs were down, but I think what's really important is that in the month of June, we had shipments, concentrate shipments that should have been made in June were pushed into July. And so when you look at our press release, you'll see that in July, the company did $4.2 million of EBITDA in the month of July. So for the first 7 months, we hit close to $8.3 million of EBITDA, which is a significant impact year over year. So the asset continues to show good progression financially year over year, and we expect that trend to continue into the second half of this year, as a result of the higher pricing that we're seeing across the board now in copper, silver, and zinc, in addition to gold. So very pleased with the Japan numbers and the continuation in that asset to perform. And finally, at the corporate level, the group EBITDA was definitely higher, but at the corporate expenses were lower year over year. This again was predominantly due to two reasons. One is in H1 of last year, we had a number of one-off expenses relating to the acquisition of Japan, which obviously we did not see this year. And also, and this year, as a result of COVID, and obviously the right thing to do is we were very thoughtful on reducing our costs across the business in order to manage the balance sheet and our cost structure as appropriately as possible. So we're seeing the fruition of that work its way through the EBITDA. And so very encouragingly, this year in the first half, we had a positive EBITDA of the group of around $500,000, which excludes one-time non-cash charges such as share-based expenses. So again, very pleased with the improvements that we're making year over year from a financial perspective on the income statement. Maybe moving to the next slide. When looking at the balance sheet, as Archim also highlighted, we've been very proactive in managing our balance sheet throughout the time that we've been in the business. Specifically in the first half, we completed an equity raise of $14 million in April of this year. Again, in the midst of the pandemic, that was an opportunistic capital raise in order to strengthen the balance sheet and to continue to add liquidity to the business in order to advance our strategic activities. So that was a key activity in the first half. In addition, we reduced our overall debt profile by close to $10 million in the first half. That $10 million reduction was in two parts. One was there was a $6 million reduction in our working capital line as a result of the equity raise. And in addition, we reduced the debt at the Japan business by roughly $4 million. So that reduction in debt was also a good part of the activity for the first half. And then the final achievement in the first half was that we extended two of our debt facilities maturities to the end of this year. So we have the investor loan, which was due in March 31st of this year, has now been extended to the end. And also the lateral working capital facility has been extended to December 31st. So again, very proactive in how we think about managing the balance sheet with regards to reducing our debt and adding liquidity at the right time. When we look to the future and the key priorities, the refinancing of the investor loan, the $20 million, which comes due at the end of this year, is an initiative that we're working through. It is our firm intention that that $20 million loan will be refinanced with some other form of debt facility. As you can appreciate, we paid back $10 million in the first half. Japan is performing quite nicely. So the business has additional debt capacity in order to refinance that loan facility. And that's something that we anticipate to complete in the coming months. One of the impacts for the first half of the year has been as COVID has been working with banks. Banks naturally have slowed down and have been a bit more cautious to do anything, frankly. But as we've seen the banking market opening up in the past couple of months, we're well on track to refinance that loan facility with another debt facility in the coming months. So that is something that we'll come back to. And then finally, look, we will continue to evaluate opportunistic capital opportunities, again, to strengthen the balance sheet or add liquidity on a case-by-case basis. You know, we have a good, healthy amount of debt on the balance sheet today. We're comfortable with that. And as we look to the future, we'll look to possibly bring in some other forms of capital, but really on a case-by-case basis, really not needed to do so at this point, but we'll be continuing to evaluate opportunistic capital opportunities. Maybe moving to the next slide, please. So just to summarize where we see Chaarat today from a capital markets perspective, I think the business has performed well. We'll see that in our share price over the past several months. Most importantly, the brokers continue to see that there's still significant upside potential in our share price. Just on Friday, we had an upgrade in our target share price by FinCap to 60p. So the overall average for our brokers today is around 54p, which is a substantial increase versus where we're trading. We also believe that that still considerably undervalues the business because there's a number of initiatives within the group that aren't really being priced into the stock. The Japan East Flank development that Darren highlighted is extremely important to the company. That'll have a substantial increase on profitability once it's fully developed. And also, as we continue to progress the strategy around the Tulkabash movement into construction and eventually production, and also expanding and getting Kiziltash into feasibility study will also continue to add value to the stock. So we think there's quite a bit of value that remains. And maybe to the next slide, please. When you look at the share price, as I highlighted, it's performed well through the time that we have executed our strategy. But I really want to highlight the bottom part of this chart, which we've shown in the past, but it shows how much we have not really received value for the 10 million ounces of gold that we have on our books. So we're a company that has 10 million ounces of gold as a resource, so we're incredibly leveraged to the gold price. The gold price obviously has had a very important growth in its value over the past several months. We don't think that our share price has reflected that yet, and I do think it's coming. But with 10 million ounces, we are an incredibly gold-sensitive company, and I think when you look compared to the peer sets, there's a lot more value that will be coming through our stock in the coming months and quarters. With that, I'll turn it back over to Archim for some concluding remarks.
Thank you, Chris. Just to highlight some of the key things that we feel strongly about Chaarat. First and foremost, when we put a new management team into the company 2 years ago with a vision to create one of the leading companies in gold sector in the former Soviet Union. Since then, we've been steadily and quickly executing on that strategy, is converting the company from explorer into a producing entity. And as you just seen, moving into the positive EBITDA territory for the first 6 months of this year, for the first time in Chaarat history. A small step, but a good step on a road to build at least 500,000 ounces producer from the existing asset base, and on top of that, add additional production through accretive M&A opportunities within our key production and operational clusters in the region. We have a very good supportive shareholder base. In addition to Labra, our main shareholder, we are very pleased to see new institutional investors coming in, as we did several small equity raises over the course of the last 18 months. We believe we remain massively undervalued, especially on EV to resources base. Basically, we have roughly $20 billion worth of gold in our resources, and some of that will be converted into the value of the company. We have managed our balance sheet very proactively, as Chris outlined in details, and will continue to do so because we are very much focused on shareholder value. We're all shareholders. We don't get paid cash bonuses, which we consciously agreed to because we want to make money to increase in the share price. And that's what is happening, and we're very happy with that trajectory. So happy to answer any questions you may have. Back to Patrick to manage that process.
Thank you, Artem, and thanks to Chris and Darren as well. So we're opening now to the Q&A session, and again, if you want, you can just press the raise hand button, and you can put your question up live to the speakers. While we just wait for that, we just start with one question that was submitted already in the beginning of the presentation in Darren's section. So Darren, that's a question for you now. Have you looked at the potential for resources from the tailings on site at Kapan? So I think the question is more in the tailings that we have, is there potential for retreat? And Darren, if you can comment on that.
It's not something that we've spent a lot of time looking at, but certainly we have looked at it. Retreatment of tails is obviously a very common thing for gold mining around the world. You look at some of the South African mines with head grades in their tails better than many new mines. So it is something that definitely we have considered. We're in the process of doing some mineralogy testing around our entire operation, looking at what's the different types of mineralogy in our ore and the mineralogy of our tails. So that will give us a better understanding as to what is the nature of the gold, how recoverable is that gold in our tailings, and that will then determine our next steps as far as strategy. We know that there is significant amounts of gold which are tied up with pyrite, and that's a potential recoverable sulfide material which we can get and then retreat further. So we're looking at all options. It's one of the key areas for us at Kapan at the moment. Is there are precious metals, there's gold, there's the polymetallic metals. How do we get the most value from that mine in whatever form it may be? So yes, we are looking at it.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Darren. So we got one raised hand from Sergey of SP Angel, and I will just get it into the loop here. Sergey, you can now unmute your mic and just raise your question.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Sorry, I didn't get. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sergey.
Right. Yeah. So, thank you for the presentation, and just a couple of questions. Like, first one is grades at Kapan. So you say second half. Just in terms of like have a kind of a number in this respect compared to the first half. Like post this year, post 2020, like back to these you put out last, or like what levels you see. And the second question is operations, like the current situation in terms of like numbers of the situation there, and in Kyrgyzstan, when like the situation that the experience was normal. I mean, if you have some kind of guidance on that.
I don't know if it was me or if he was breaking up.
Totally. Yeah, I managed to catch a little bit of the question around Kapan, but very little, unfortunately.
I think the first question related to Kapan and the grade. If you can reiterate, Darren, the outlook for H2. I think that was his question. And then Sergey, if you can maybe try to go to a different area so that we can hear you better. You were breaking up during the questions. Thank you.
Well, as was visible from the Kapan slide, AUEQ equivalents for H1 2020 were around about 2.8, slightly lower than the 2.87, I think it was, lower than in H1 of the previous year. Our target at the moment is to get over 3 grams and preferably to get up to about 3.2 grams per ton of AUEQ. That's the area that we are targeting currently.
Okay, thank you, Darren. Sergey, you're still live, so if you want to reiterate the question that you had on the Kyrgyz assets, that would be appreciated.
Sorry for that. So I was asking about the COVID-related situation. If you've mentioned like problems with getting people on site, getting equipment on site. How do you see the situation evolving like in the second half? Do you expect it like to be normalized, like maybe towards the end of the year or beginning of the year? Just like what do you see on the ground?
Okay. Yep. So as far as on the ground, I think it's fair to say that the worst wave of COVID seems to have now left the country for the last 3 to 4 weeks, maybe even longer now. The number of daily infections and death rate has dropped significantly, which is very good to see. Many of the controls are still in place around social distancing and social activities, although there has been quite a lessening of the sort of social distancing, mask wearing in country. So we definitely see things improving. We're not taking any chances at the moment. We are waiting. So we're still working remotely with regards to office work. We still test everybody before they're allowed to go to site. I've just flown back into to Kyrgyzstan yesterday, made sure that I had my COVID test, wearing the mask. So all of those things we will maintain until we know that it is absolutely safe for our employees. We continue working with our Turkish partner and the government to make sure that we're in a position that once we do start to mobilize and reactivate various work streams, that we're able to do that without a sort of stop-start again, which is very expensive. So that's pretty much where we are in country at the moment around COVID. Kapan, somewhat different story. Kapan has been much more stable. It's in a more remote part of Armenia. It's certainly seen a lot more stability, I would say. Very few, if any, issues in Kapan. So that is much more open, much more active. Still got the controls in place, but we're a little bit more free about what we can do there.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Sergey. I'll mute you now again. Okay, maybe before we conclude the session, time for one or two more questions. Just one that we got also in the Q&A section written was more targeted to Artem regarding the M&A strategy. Is it still viable at a 2,000 gold price? Just a general comment, Artem, if you may.
Thank you. Regardless of the gold price, there are specific opportunities which are specific to the particular asset, company, or shareholder. The gold price may fluctuate up or down, but the long-term consensus price is quite different from today's levels. So our view on the commodity price when evaluating acquisition opportunities is not based on a current market. There always will be opportunities that come and go. What we're looking for is a significant operation that can produce around 100,000 ounces at a producing or near producing level, which has synergies with our existing operations. We envisage that Chaarat eventually will operate 3 clusters, one in Central Asia, where we are already in Kyrgyzstan and has potential to look into opportunities in Kazakhstan and maybe eventually Uzbekistan as well. We are in Armenia, which is a very geology interesting jurisdiction, and Russian Far East represents an interesting and very much unexplored potential. I think that's all I can say in regards to the M&A opportunities. I don't think the current fluctuation in gold price has any detrimental negative effects on that part of our strategy.
Thank you very much, Artem. That's very good. And by this, I would like to conclude the session. Any other questions that we have not addressed here live now, we will respond by email with our IR address after this call. Again, the presentation, a replay of it will be available on the homepage in the news webcast section. So thank you very much all for attending this morning's session, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.